Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well and are staying healthy, especially these days. I figured I would show you all my retro gaming setup, which I've been building for a long time, very slowly. And this is definitely for my older retro systems. For the newer systems like the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube, I have a different setup going on with a TV more suitable to those systems, in my opinion. And they're all plug and play, ready to play, with the exception for one system. And I'll get to why when we get there, and show and kind of tell you guys why that's important to me. But yeah, in this video, I kind of want to go over why I picked each element for my setup and go over all the parts and maybe give you some ideas as to what your setup can look like if you're kind of contemplating that, or if you're just really bored and want to see what other people kind of do for their setup. Hey, this video is good for that too. But yeah, without further ado, let's continue. Alright, the first thing I'm going to show you guys is my monitor that I use for the games. This isn't as obscure as it once was. I think a lot more people are aware of these kind of monitors than even a few years ago. But this is the Sony BVM 20F1U. It is a broadcast grade monitor. It was initially used in its day for, broadcast, as the name might indicate. Kind of for color correcting, video editing, just to make sure everything is color accurate before it goes on air. I think these cost like $10,000 or maybe even more back then. You used to be able to find these for very cheap, relatively speaking, but now they're kind of creeping up in price as the people who are selling these monitors know how desirable they are among retro enthusiasts. But yeah, kind of one of the neat things about it, again, is the color accuracy, but also just the clarity that they provide over a standard CRT. I don't know if this camera will be able to show it, but everything is very sharp as Richter's about to get hit by a skeleton. Sorry about that, my friend. But yeah, everything looks amazing. Though some critics would say that it looks too sharp for old games, and that the CRTs we used to use back in the day did not display the games anywhere near as well as these did. And some people actually prefer, standard consumer CRTs, which I can agree with to some degree, but I'll get to that a little bit later when I talk about one of the systems I have. But yeah, the neat thing, well, actually, the thing that you would have to kind of get used to if you were to get one of these and you're not as savvy as far as video signals go, is that to get the most out of this type of monitor, you have to use the RGB signal through SCART, typically. And if you're from North America, our retro gaming experience was mostly used with, using RF or composite, the yellow, red, and white cables. And maybe as video if you were kind of a fancy lad back in the day. And a component was kind of introduced during the GameCube PS2 generation, though most people didn't use component back then either. Most people just used composite just throughout that era. But yeah, I won't go into how to set this up and whatnot, just because I feel like other videos might be able to explain that better and also just take a long time. But it's a monitor I'm happy to have. Sorry for just showing Richter getting his ass beat repeatedly, but I don't have my hand on the controller, obviously, so I can't play. But yeah, let's move on. I just want to show you guys some of the stuff I have as far as decorative stuff goes, just because this kind of setup could look very clinical and boring without some decorations. So this is a red Yoshi, which my sister got me last Christmas because she lives in New York and has access to the Nintendo World Store. so that was cool. And this is Pulse Man, which I got many years ago just because I'm a big Game Freak fan. And this was one of the games I really wanted to play. So yeah, I bought it off someone, and yeah, I really love the box art, so I have it on display. And speaking of Game Freak, we have Venusaur here, which I personally got from the Nintendo World Store. One of my favorite Pokemon. And then in the background, we have Rob, who most of you should know. It's not the full Rob setup, as you can see, but, you know, close enough. It kind of matches the BVM color scheme, so fits right in. And, yeah, let's move on to the kind of monitor stand I have going, which is a wire shelf with wheels or casters, if you will. And even though it's not the most aesthetically pleasing way to kind of store things on and whatnot, you know, if you look at other people's setups, they have nice, like, clean white shelving and whatnot for their systems. But the reason why I went for this is because, one, this BVM is like 80 something pounds, so I like the ability to wheel it around to places. And secondly, because most of the monitor stands I see are not this deep. This is a very deep monitor. I think it's like 20 something inches, so maybe even more actually. And I actually had to get custom shelving for this from a website called Shelving.com. Sorry for my finger being in the way. But yeah, Shelving.com, which doesn't even seem like a real website based on how generic it is. But yeah, got it from there, and I couldn't be happier with it. Just want to show you guys one more thing. He actually just dropped out from the race recently, but never forget, people. Never forget. But yeah, let's get on to the systems then. Alright, strangely enough, we're going to start with the Atari Jaguar. And traditionally this hasn't been in my RGB setup. I had it on another TV, but because it has RGB built in, I figured I might as well just get the SCART cable and just implement it into the setup. Not much else to say otherwise, but I'll just give it a test run so you guys can see what it looks like. This is one of my favorite boot up screens, by the way, this part especially. There's the Jaguar cube. What a classic. This is Tempest 2000. Probably the best game on the Jaguar. Not going to play it, but you can probably see from the title screen, especially the text, that looks super sharp. It's never going to look as great on a camera as it is in real life, just because taking pictures of CRTs has always been kind of weird. But I figured I'll show you all some CRT footage when I go over each console just for the hell of it. I'll take that off. And next we have the NES, which in this case is an AV Famicom, and I'll get into why I decided to go with that for my NES solution. And this is the Famicom Disk System, which I'm assuming most of you know about, but it was a short-lived add-on that used floppy disks, like so. This is Super Mario Bros. 2, the original one, which we know as the Lost Levels. But yeah, I went with the AV Famicom because I kind of wanted an all-in-one solution to play every kind of game on the NES and Famicom, essentially. You know, obviously this can play every Famicom game, and then with the add-on Famicom disk system games, and then with an adapter it can also play US NES games, though it's difficult for it to get enough clearance, so I might actually swap this with a Jaguar eventually. But yeah, with the adapter plus an NES cartridge, which is much taller than a Famicom cartridge, it barely has enough clearance, and it's kind of annoying. So But yeah, I think this is a great solution, and unfortunately, with the Famicom and the NES in general, none of them come with RGB built in, so you have to get it modded for RGB, which is what I did. And then additionally beyond that, I also got it modded for the second controller port to recognize the NES Zapper, which AV Famicoms do not do, because they have an individual port right here that's covered up right now that detects the gun, because the Japanese Zappers use that port. So the guy I had mod this, he also modded the second controller port to recognize them. So that was nice to have, because I didn't want to go ahead and buy a Japanese Zapper. So yeah, let's demo it for a second. This is Castlevania 3, the famously unique Famicom game in that it has more advanced sound compared to the US Castlevania 3. But it's a great looking game, and probably one of the best NES games, so cool stuff there. But yes, let's move on to its successor, the Super Famicom. Yeah, so this is the SNES Mini, or the SNES Junior, if you will. Ideally, I would like to have had a stock, original Super Nintendo, but they're kind of unreliable in terms of the RGB quality. The earlier ones have, worse RGB quality, and the later ones are kind of hard to find. So I figured I would get I already had a SNES Mini, and I figured I'd get it modded for RGB, and it produces probably the best signal of any Super Nintendo model, or at least tied for the best. So, yeah. So again, this needs a mod, though the traditional US Super Nintendo does not need a mod. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that. But let's demo it as I have with the other ones. Always loved the Nintendo logo morphed into the Square logo. Yep, and this is the Super Mario RPG opening. Sorry about the CRT quality again on camera. It's always a little weird. I'll try to get a better angle. But yeah, I always thought this game looked great on a CRT. Some people don't like the way this and like the Donkey Kong Country games look, but I always thought they looked great on a CRT. See, look at this. This is awesome. But yeah, as much as I'd love to show the rest of this demo, we can move on to the next Nintendo system. Here we have the N64. This is kind of a weird one as far as RGB goes. As with most other Nintendo systems, there's a bit of a complication as far as RGB goes. For all N64 models, I think even the European ones, you need to mod the system for RGB, but it's a fairly cheap mod compared to a lot of other systems. But the thing is, the RGB doesn't pop out as much compared to composite, in my opinion, compared to other systems. Even since getting the mod, I've played a lot of N64 on regular CRT monitors or TVs under composite, and I think it looks really good even with composite, because I think the N64 is really built around composite and kind of US centric TVs. It was a very American system, oddly enough. But yeah, just to give a bit of a demonstration, let's look at one of the best games ever made. Super Mario 64. So of course it still looks really good, and it does benefit from RGB. It's actually one of the better games to showcase RGB, because it's definitely cleaner than a lot of N64 games overall. It's less blurry, in my opinion, than a lot of the other N64 games. So you can definitely tell it's very sharp by the text, and even Mario's face looks really good. I just want to show some of the demo that's about to come up. Such a classic. Really glad this is being remastered for a new generation on Switch. So yeah, that's the N64. And we'll go to the final Nintendo system here. And earlier in the video when I said I don't have my PS2 and GameCube and whatnot on the setup, and I casually just pass over the GameCube, you were probably confused as to why I have this here, but it's actually due to the Game Boy player at the bottom. This is here to indicate that as well, this SD media launcher. But yeah, I use this setup to play Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games. And I don't use the software that comes with the Game Boy player. I use what's called a Gameboy Interface using the Action Replay disc to load a homebrew software called Gameboy Interface, which makes better use of the hardware here, which is basically just a Game Boy Advance. It's more accurate, there's less lag, and it's just better overall, and it's constantly being updated too, which is really nice. I won't be able to show any GBA footage, but just to show that it works, yeah, I'll show you guys a bit of it. And I have this on a separate channel because I use the GameCube through component, unlike the rest of these systems that use RGB. So I have it on channel 2. So here's the Action Replay logo. Sorry for the CRT weirdness again. It looks clean on my end, but it's definitely like flickering on the camera. Let's try to get a better angle for you guys. Yeah, this is better. Oh, well, anyway, this is where I would pick the software from, GBI 2, I think it is on this memory card. But yeah, definitely recommended. I won't show any more of this just because it looks weird right now. Sorry. Okay. Going down to the next row, Sega Saturn. Not much to say here because it has RGB built in, so just plug and play, just buy a RGB SCART cable and you're good to go. But I will demo it anyway. Now this boots to my Action Replay, which I have to just so I can play import games without modding my system. And I also need to replace the battery because the date always resets. But it's not a big deal overall. Just the opening. Not bad. Let's try to get through this quickly. And I'm doing these demos just to show to you that, you know, everything is playable, except for the one system, which we'll get to next, actually. This isn't an exclusive, but it is best on Saturn, in my opinion. The PS1 era Capcom boot up. So in the Japanese version of this game, there's this animation plus original song, which is cool. That would be Rockman 8 or Mega Man 8. Just gonna show a little bit of it. But yeah, in general, RGB looks great with Saturn, especially because it has a lot of cool advanced 2D games and few really good 3D games that really pop out with the RGB signal. I always like the way he said the title. But yeah, we can move on. Sorry, that was my cat. Okay, so next we have the PS1. I really do like the system a lot. Sorry, I just want to make sure my cat's okay. But my PS1 is not plugged in at the moment because I have 9 systems here that use RGB, but my SCART switch only accepts 8 ports, so to use this I'd have to change cables. And the reason why that's annoying to me is because I like having everything playable, because if everything's hooked up, you're more likely to play the things that are hooked up, which is why I recommend everyone get a SCART switch if they have a SCART setup. Otherwise, they just become these possessions that you own but you just don't use. So I would like to get an additional SCART port just for this PS1, but SCART solutions are very hard to come by in the US just because it wasn't a standard here really. So yeah, if anyone has any ideas for me that are cheap, please do let me know, but I would have liked to showcase the PS1. Okay, and next up we have the Omega, which is a Neo Geo MVS console. This is an official piece of hardware, but it basically uses the internals of a Neo Geo MVS arcade machine and puts it in this shell that looks like a Neo Geo AES system. It's really high quality, and I'm really glad to have it as someone who was always curious about the Neo Geo, but wasn't an oil tycoon, so I couldn't afford this, really. So let's show a little bit of it right now. I was just trying out the US console version, which means it doesn't have blood and whatnot. Game is of course Metal Slug, and in this case it's Metal Slug X, which is kind of a re-release of Metal Slug 2 with less slowdown. But yeah, of course Neo Geo or SNK had really good artists on their team, so it's really easy to showcase RGB using Neo Geo. Yeah, I'm hoping you can appreciate how slick and sharp the graphics are. Yeah, not much to say though, but definitely recommend a Neo Geo solution in your setup, despite the expensive nature of it. Alright, next we have the PC Engine Duo R, which is basically the TurboGrafx 16 and the Turbo CD combo system, the Japanese version, of course. And this is essentially on the floor. Unfortunately, I couldn't fit it onto the cart or whatever you want to call it. But just so it wouldn't be on the regular carpet, I had this mat that I got recently and just put it on top of that. And I think it works pretty nicely here. This has to be modded for RGB. And this one I bought off eBay that already had RGB installed on it, so it was all good. But yeah, let's showcase an obscure-ish game that I only found out about it fairly recently, and it's definitely one of the more bizarre games you'll find on the system. Yeah, so watch this incredible opening sequence. So, but otherwise it's a shooter. I'm playing with one hand, so it's kind of weird. But yeah, the game is called Toilet Kids, and it's as weird as you would expect. But yeah, I just wanted to show you guys this game because it's kind of crazy and funny. Yep, that's right. This thing is shooting brown turds at you, and yeah, what a wild game. It's actually the only Hue card I have for the system, so yeah, I gotta love it. But yeah, that is the PC Engine. And let's move on to the final system, the Sega Genesis. This is the Sega CDX, which has the CD, the Sega CD built in, and it's a very slick looking model compared to the Tower of Power that you otherwise need to have to play Sega CD games on. And this has RGB built in, fortunately, like pretty much all Genesis solutions. So yeah, you're good to go as long as you buy the cable. But still, let's demo Sonic 3. Classic Sega opening. Colors are amazing. Just waiting for the demo to show up. But yeah, not much to say other than RGB is a really essential part of the Genesis in my opinion, because the composite quality on Genesis is like notoriously awful, and RGB kind of makes it look like a half generation more advanced by comparison. Like, no, like I'm not even joking. But yeah, definitely recommend RGB on Genesis. If you were to only, for some reason, get an RGB cable for one system, it would be for Genesis. But, yeah, I guess we'll end on that pretty much. It's the final system I have in the setup. I guess the only other thing to mention are my speakers at the bottom. I don't remember the exact model, but it's a Klipsch. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. But the reason why I have speakers in my setup, normally I just use the TV stereo, which some people are going to roll their eyes about, but BVMs don't have built-in speakers, so I'm using external speakers here to output audio. But otherwise, yeah, this is the setup, and thank you all for watching. I'm very proud of what I've been able to build here. It's taken many years and a lot of money, unfortunately, but I like that I can play so many great systems without much effort and in a pretty, high quality fashion. So if you have any tips to improve my setup, or if you have any questions about this setup, or just want to talk about your own setup, please let me know in the comments, and I will comment, or I will reply to that, as I often do. So, thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.